As we begin Chapter 3 of the Secret Codes of Proverbs, we enter a deeply practical and transformative territory. In this chapter, Solomon offers us guidance that not only leads us toward a wise life, but also shows us how this wisdom can manifest in every area of our lives. From our finances to our relationships, Solomon teaches us the importance of fully trusting in God, recognizing His presence and direction in everything we do. Before diving into the specific verses of this chapter, it's important to briefly recall the lessons we've learned in the previous chapters. In Chapter 1, we were introduced to wisdom as the foundation of knowledge, rooted in the fear of the Lord. In Chapter 2, we explored the active pursuit of wisdom and how this pursuit leads to protection and the understanding of divine knowledge. These chapters established a solid foundation, showing that wisdom is not just a concept, but an active practice that must be diligently sought. Now in Chapter 3, Solomon deepens this practice, beginning with one of the most central themes of all Scripture: trust in God. This chapter challenges us to completely transfer our trust from our own abilities and understanding to the Lord, recognizing that He is the source of all true wisdom and guidance. Trusting in God is the foundation for living a truly wise life. Solomon invites us to trust in the Lord with all our hearts and not to lean on our own understanding. This is a call to total faith, to surrender our control and acknowledge that ultimately it is God who guides our steps. This trust, however, is not passive. It requires action on our part, an active recognition of God in all our decisions and paths. Solomon also shows us that this trust in God is not just a spiritual choice. It has practical implications that permeate every aspect of our lives. When we trust in God, we are empowered to live with humility, avoid self-reliance, and constantly seek divine guidance. This kind of trust transforms our worldview and leads us to a life of peace and stability, even amid uncertainties and challenges. Trusting in God, as we will see in the following verses, also involves a continuous acknowledgement of His presence in our lives. It's not just a singular act of faith, but a lifestyle, a habit of recognizing God in all our ways and decisions. This practice of acknowledging God not only straightens our paths, but also protects us from making rash or unwise decisions. Therefore, trusting in God is both the starting point and the unifying thread of this chapter. It is the principle that ties together all the advice Solomon offers us, from how we handle our resources to how we respond to divine discipline. Everything begins with the willingness to surrender our limited understanding and trust in the infinite wisdom of God. As we move forward in Chapter 3, we will see how this trust in God manifests in various practical areas of our lives. Solomon will show us that by trusting in God and recognizing His presence in everything, we not only draw closer to Him, but also find true peace, prosperity, and direction in all our endeavors. This introduction prepares us for a deeper exploration of the promises and principles Solomon offers. Trust in God is not an abstract idea. It is a daily choice that shapes our lives in profound and transformative ways. Get ready to dive into the lessons of this chapter and discover how trusting in God can radically transform your life and decisions. In Chapter 3 of Proverbs, Solomon offers one of the most powerful and practical pieces of advice for a life of wisdom. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. This verse is often quoted for its depth and simplicity, but it is also one of the most significant challenges we can face in our spiritual journey. Trusting the Lord with all your heart implies a complete and unreserved surrender. It means that our trust in God must be total, encompassing all areas of our life, our decisions, our relationships, our finances, and even our fears and anxieties. It is not enough to trust God only in easy situations or when everything is going well. Solomon challenges us to trust Him, especially in times of uncertainty when we are tempted to rely on our own understanding. Full trust in God requires us to abandon self-reliance. Often we believe that we can solve our problems or achieve our goals by relying solely on our own wisdom and abilities. But Solomon warns us that this kind of self-reliance is limited and flawed. Our understandings and perceptions are incomplete and often distorted by our emotions, past experiences, and human limitations. The real challenge lies in not leaning on our own understanding. This expression literally means not to support or depend on our own limited perspective. Solomon recognizes that it is natural to want to control our lives and make decisions based on what seems logical and rational to us. However, he teaches us that there is a wisdom greater than ours, and that this divine wisdom should be the foundation of our trust. When we trust in God with all our hearts, we acknowledge that He has a complete and perfect view of the past, present, and future. He knows the paths we cannot yet see, understands the consequences of our actions in ways beyond our comprehension, and has a purpose for our lives greater than any plan we can formulate on our own. By trusting Him, we place our lives in the hands of the One who created us and knows exactly what is best for us. The conflict between trust and self-reliance is a struggle that everyone faces at some point. In a culture that often values independence and the ability to do it yourself, fully trusting in God can seem counterintuitive. However, Solomon shows us that true wisdom is not about being self-reliant, but about recognizing our dependence on God and our need for His guidance in every decision we make. Practical examples of trusting in God can be found throughout the Bible and in the lives of many followers of Christ throughout history. Think of Abraham, who trusted in God when he was called to leave his homeland without knowing where he was going. Or Daniel, who trusted in God even when he was thrown into the lion's den. These stories show us that when we trust in God with all our hearts, He guides our steps even when the path seems uncertain or dangerous. In everyday life, trusting in God can mean making difficult decisions that do not make sense in light of human understanding, but are aligned with biblical principles. It can mean choosing honesty at work, even when dishonesty seems like the easier path to success. It can mean patiently waiting for God's guidance, rather than acting impulsively. It can mean praying and seeking God's will before making important decisions, trusting that He will reveal the right path at the right time. The result of trusting in God is a life of peace and security, even amid life's storms. When we trust Him with all our hearts, we are not shaken by the uncertainties or challenges we face because we know He is in control. This trust allows us to live without fear, knowing that no matter what happens, God is working for our good and for the fulfillment of His purposes in our lives. As we move forward to the next verses in this chapter, we will explore how this trust in God manifests in different areas of life, and how acknowledging God in all our ways leads to a straight and blessed path. But first, we are called to reflect. Are we truly trusting God with all our hearts, or are we still leaning on our own understanding? This is a question each of us must answer, and the answer to this question will determine the direction our lives will take. As we move forward in chapter 3 of Proverbs, Solomon presents us with a principle that is both an extension and a deepening of the previous advice on trusting in God. In verse 6, he exhorts us to acknowledge God in all our ways, with the promise that if we do so, He will make our paths straight. This verse invites us to live with a continuous awareness of God's presence in all areas of our lives, recognizing His guiding hand in every decision we make. What does it mean to acknowledge God in all our ways? Acknowledging God is not simply a matter of praying before meals or occasionally reading the Bible. Solomon is talking about a lifestyle where God is constantly recognized as the Lord and guide of every aspect of our existence. It means involving God in every decision, big and small, and seeking His direction in all our endeavors. This practice of continuous acknowledgement involves an attitude of humility and dependence. It is admitting that no matter how much we plan and prepare, we are limited in our understanding and need God's guidance to make wise choices. Acknowledging God in all our ways means saying, "Lord, I trust that your way is better than mine, and I want you to direct my steps." Solomon promises that when we acknowledge God in this way, He will make our paths straight. This means that God will remove the obstacles that may be in our way and guide us along the right path. This promise of divine direction is one of the greatest assurances we can have when we trust in God. He not only guides us, but also protects us from the pitfalls we cannot see on our own. How can we acknowledge God in our daily lives? This acknowledgement can take many forms, from regular prayer and scripture reading to the practice of seeking God's will in our decisions. It can mean asking God for wisdom when making important decisions, like a job change or a significant step in a relationship. It can mean asking God how we can best serve others in our work or community, or how we can reflect His love and justice in challenging situations. Acknowledging God also involves being attentive to the signs and doors He opens and closes in our lives. Often, God guides us through circumstances, opportunities that arise or obstacles that appear, and it is up to us to be tuned in to His voice and direction. By living with this awareness, we are better able to perceive God's hand guiding our choices and adjusting our path as needed. Moreover, acknowledging God in all our ways helps us maintain a proper perspective on our life and priorities. In a world that so often values material success and human recognition, this practice reminds us that our true direction comes from God and that our greatest achievement is living in alignment with His will. This frees us from external pressures and gives us peace, knowing that we are following the path God has prepared for us. The results of acknowledging God in our ways are profound and transformative. When we live this way, we experience an inner peace that comes from knowing we are in God's hands. He makes our paths straight, which means that He not only guides us, but also adjusts our way to avoid mistakes and dangers. This does not mean we won't face challenges, but rather that God will guide us through them, teaching and strengthening us in the process. Solomon challenges us to make this acknowledgement a constant habit, a daily practice that shapes all our actions. This is not easy in a world where we are often tempted to act in haste or based on our own judgments. However, he assures us that by doing so, God's direction will become clear and our path will be secure. As we reflect on this powerful truth, we must ask ourselves, are we acknowledging God in all our ways? Are we truly seeking His guidance in every area of our lives, or are we still trying to manage parts of our life on our own? This is Solomon's invitation, to live with a continuous awareness of God and allow Him to guide every step of our way. As we continue to explore this chapter, we will see how this practice of acknowledging God, combined with trust in Him, leads to a life of health, prosperity, and peace. These promises are available to all who choose to follow the path of divine wisdom. After guiding us on the importance of trusting God and acknowledging Him in all our ways, Solomon leads us to another crucial dimension of wisdom, the fear of the Lord. In verses 7 and 8 of chapter 3, he advises us, "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones." In this passage, Solomon addresses the issue of humility and reverent respect for God as the foundation for a healthy and spiritually prosperous life. He begins with an important warning: do not be wise in your own eyes. This advice warns us against the trap of pride and self-reliance. When we start to trust too much in our wisdom, we risk making serious errors because our understanding is limited and often influenced by our emotions, biases, and past experiences. Solomon invites us to replace this reliance on our wisdom with the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord, as we've seen before, is not about being afraid, but about a deep reverence and respect for God. It's an acknowledgement of His greatness, power, and holiness, and a continual awareness that we are living under His guidance and judgment. This fear leads us to turn away from evil because we understand that living in harmony with God's will is the path to true wisdom and happiness. The practice of fearing the Lord has tangible benefits, both spiritual and physical. Solomon promises that this attitude will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. This promise is not merely symbolic. It reflects the reality that living a life aligned with God's principles promotes overall well-being. When we follow the path of wisdom and the fear of the Lord, we avoid many of the destructive behaviors that lead to stress, anxiety, and illness. Moreover, this life of wisdom and fear of God creates a state of inner peace that reflects in our physical health. Modern studies have shown that people who live with purpose and peace tend to have better physical health. This confirms what Solomon said thousands of years ago: wisdom and the fear of the Lord have the power to heal and restore, bringing refreshment not just to the soul, but also to the body. Turning away from evil is another essential part of this advice. Evil here can be understood as anything that separates us from God, behaviors, thoughts, or decisions that go against the principles of wisdom established by Him. Wisdom helps us discern these negative influences and avoid them, protecting our minds, bodies, and spirits from the consequences of sin. When we turn away from evil, we choose life. We opt for paths that promote health, peace, and prosperity. This choice is not always easy, especially in a world where evil often disguises itself as something desirable or harmless. However, Solomon reminds us that the fear of the Lord gives us the clarity and strength to make these difficult choices, which bring lasting blessings. Reflections on humility. Solomon also challenges us to reflect on our humility. Are we willing to admit that we don't know everything? Are we ready to seek God's wisdom rather than relying on our limited understanding? This humility is essential for spiritual growth because it opens our hearts and minds to receive divine guidance. Practical applications of the fear of the Lord can be seen in how we live our daily lives. It can be in how we treat others, recognizing that everyone is made in God's image and deserves respect and dignity. It can be in how we conduct our business, always seeking justice and integrity. It can be in how we take care of our bodies, knowing they are the temple of the Holy Spirit. The fear of the Lord also motivates us to constantly seek purity of heart and to turn away from anything that might corrupt us. This involves vigilance over what we allow into our minds and hearts, through what we watch, read, and even whom we associate with. By choosing the path of wisdom, we commit to a life that is not only morally right, but also deeply satisfying and healthy. Conclusion of this section. Solomon leaves us with a powerful image, the image of a life filled with health and vitality, the direct result of fearing the Lord and rejecting evil. He reminds us that true wisdom is not just a matter of knowledge, but of living in harmony with divine principles, which in turn brings healing and renewal to our entire being. As we continue exploring this chapter, we will see how these truths apply to specific areas of life, such as our finances and our response to divine discipline. But for now, we are called to reflect. Are we living in the fear of the Lord, acknowledging His sovereignty, and seeking to turn away from evil? Are we willing to let go of our understanding and trust in the wisdom that comes from God? In chapter 3 of Proverbs, Solomon offers us practical advice that touches on a vital aspect of our lives, our finances and resources. In verses 9 and 10, he instructs us, Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. This passage invites us to reflect on how our relationship with money and material goods can be an expression of our trust in God and our commitment to His wisdom. Honoring the Lord with your wealth means recognizing that everything we have comes from God. Our resources, whether large or small, are gifts that God has entrusted to us. Honoring God with these possessions is a way of demonstrating our gratitude and our dependence on Him. This doesn't just mean giving a portion of what we have, but managing our resources in a way that reflects the values of God's kingdom. The concept of first fruits is fundamental to understanding this passage. In Jewish culture, first fruits were the first part of the harvest, and offering them to God was a practice that symbolized trust in Him for the remainder of the harvest. By giving the first fruits, God's people acknowledged that everything came from Him and that He deserved the first and the best. For us, this translates into giving God priority in our finances, not just the leftovers. It's about putting God first in our lives, including how we handle money. The principle of tithing and generosity are implicit in this instruction. Solomon calls us to be generous with what we have, not out of obligation, but as an act of worship and faith. When we give God the first fruits, we show that we trust Him to provide for our needs and that we are not attached to money. This generosity also reflects God's heart, who is generous and desires that His children share His blessings with others. The promised rewards for honoring God with our wealth are clear. Your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. This promise reflects the biblical principle that God blesses those who are faithful with what He has entrusted to them. This doesn't mean that God will always give us material wealth in return for our generosity, but that He will take care of our needs and give us enough to live and bless others. Practical applications in modern life can include various ways to honor God with our resources. It might be through tithing, donations to the church, helping those in need, or investing in causes that promote justice and mercy. It also involves how we manage what God has given us, living with integrity, avoiding greed and waste, and using our resources in a way that brings glory to God. Honoring God with our wealth also protects us from the idolatry of money. In a world where financial success is often seen as the primary goal of life, this practice keeps us focused on God as the true source of our security and provision. It reminds us that money, while necessary, is not our God, and that our true trust must be in God, not in our possessions. The promise of abundance that Solomon describes goes beyond the material. While he speaks of barns filled and vats brimming over, the abundance God promises to those who honor Him with their wealth includes peace, contentment, and a sense of purpose that money alone cannot provide. This is an abundance that enriches our lives in every way, creating a cycle of generosity and blessing. Challenges for the viewers. At this point, we are challenged to reflect on our own relationship with money and material goods. Are we honoring God with our resources? Are we giving Him the first fruits, or just what's left over? Are we living in a way that reflects our trust in God as our provider? Or are we trying to secure our future through our possessions? This passage invites us to take an honest look at how we use the resources God has given us. It's not just about how much we give, but about how we live, with generosity, gratitude, and a heart that desires to see God's kingdom advance through our faithful stewardship. Conclusion of this section. Honoring God with our wealth is a practice of wisdom that connects us with divine blessings and provision. By doing so, we not only show our gratitude and trust in God, but also position ourselves to receive His blessings in our lives. It's a powerful reminder that by putting God first in all areas of our life, we experience a truly abundant and prosperous life. As we continue exploring this chapter, we will see how these practices of wisdom apply to other important areas of our lives, including how we respond to divine discipline. But for now, we are called to consider, are we honoring God with everything we have? And how is this practice shaping our life and relationship with God? In chapter 3 of Proverbs, Solomon addresses a theme that, although often uncomfortable, is essential for our spiritual growth: divine discipline. In verses 11 and 12, he instructs us, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline and do not resent His rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those He loves, as a father, the son He delights in." These verses offer us a profound insight into the purpose of discipline in our lives and help us understand how we should respond to it. The concept of discipline can be challenging. In our society, discipline is often viewed as something negative, a punishment or correction imposed to deprive us of something. However, the biblical perspective presents discipline as an expression of God's love and care. Just as a loving father corrects his child to teach and protect him, God uses discipline to guide us on the path of wisdom and righteousness. Solomon begins with an important warning: do not despise the Lord's discipline and do not resent His rebuke. He acknowledges that our natural tendency may be to resist correction, especially when it causes discomfort or challenges us to change. We may become frustrated or discouraged when we face difficulties, especially if we don't understand that they are part of God's process to shape and strengthen us. However, Solomon encourages us to see God's discipline as an opportunity for growth, not as an unjust punishment. The purpose of divine discipline is manifold. First, it serves to correct us when we are wrong, bringing us back on the right path. We are all susceptible to making decisions that take us away from God's will, and discipline is God's way of alerting and redirecting us. Second, discipline teaches us to develop character. Facing challenges and adversity strengthens us, makes us more resilient, and helps us grow in wisdom and spiritual maturity. Solomon assures us that God disciplines those He loves, just as a father corrects the son he delights in. This loving divine care is an assurance that even when we go through difficult times, God is present and working for our good. He does not correct us out of cruelty or to cause us pain, but to help us avoid future mistakes, to protect us from the consequences of sin, and to guide us toward a full and blessed life. How we respond to divine discipline is a crucial matter. We can choose to resist and harden our hearts, or we can choose to accept discipline with humility and gratitude, recognizing that it is a tool God uses to shape us in His image. Solomon encourages us to adopt the latter approach, to see discipline as a demonstration of God's love and as an opportunity to grow and mature. Examples of divine discipline can be found throughout the Bible. Think of Jonah, who was disciplined by God when he was swallowed by a great fish, to be redirected to fulfill his mission in Nineveh. Or think of David, who faced severe consequences for his sins, but also found restoration and renewal through divine correction. These examples show us that while discipline may be difficult, it always has a redemptive purpose. In practical life, accepting God's discipline can mean recognizing that the difficulties and challenges we face have a greater purpose. It can mean being honest about our failures and seeking God's correction instead of running from it. It can also mean being open to learning from difficult situations, allowing God to use those moments to teach and guide us. Discipline as a path to wisdom is a central theme in Proverbs. Solomon teaches us that by accepting God's discipline, we become wiser, stronger, and more aligned with God's will. This wisdom, in turn, prepares us to face life's challenges with confidence and grace, knowing that God is guiding and sustaining us every step of the way. Reflections for the viewers. At this point, we are challenged to consider our own attitude toward God's discipline. Are we open to being corrected by God, or do we resist His disciplining hand? Are we willing to see challenges as opportunities to grow and draw closer to God, or do we become bitter and discouraged? The answer to these questions can determine how we experience God's discipline in our lives. Conclusion of this section. Divine discipline is an expression of God's love, designed to guide, protect, and mature us. By accepting this discipline with humility and gratitude, we not only avoid future mistakes, but also grow in wisdom and spiritual maturity. This is an essential part of the wisdom journey that Solomon invites us to follow, a journey that leads to a life of blessing, peace, and closeness to God. As we continue to explore Chapter 3, we will see how this understanding of divine discipline fits into a larger framework of blessings and promises associated with wisdom. But for now, we are called to reflect. Are we accepting God's discipline in our lives? And how is this acceptance shaping our character and spiritual walk? As we near the end of Chapter 3 of Proverbs, Solomon leads us to consider the blessings that accompany wisdom. In verses 13 to 18, he describes wisdom as something invaluable, more precious than gold and silver, and capable of bringing true happiness and prosperity to those who find it. He writes, "Blessed is the one who finds wisdom, and the one who gets understanding, for the gain from her is better than gain from silver, and her profit better than gold." Solomon begins with a powerful statement, "Blessed is the one who finds wisdom." The term blessed here means being deeply happy and blessed. This happiness is not a fleeting or superficial emotion, but a deep sense of peace and contentment that comes from living in harmony with God's principles. Solomon shows us that true happiness and blessedness do not come from external circumstances, but from a relationship with divine wisdom. The superiority of wisdom over material wealth is a theme that Solomon emphasizes repeatedly. He reminds us that the gain from wisdom is far better than silver and gold. This is not a rejection of material goods, but a reminder that, valuable as they are, they cannot compare with the enduring benefits of wisdom. Wisdom offers something that money cannot buy: direction, discernment, peace of mind, and a life aligned with God's will. The blessings associated with wisdom are listed by Solomon in a way that helps us understand their depth and scope. He describes wisdom as a tree of life to those who take hold of her, an image that evokes the Garden of Eden and God's original purpose for humanity, to live in communion with Him and enjoy a full and fruitful life. Wisdom thus reconnects us with this divine purpose, bringing life, vitality, and purpose to our existence. Solomon also mentions that wisdom is more precious than rubies, and that nothing you desire can compare with her. This challenges us to reconsider our priorities and desires. In a world that often encourages us to pursue material success, status, or pleasure, Solomon reminds us that wisdom should be our greatest goal. It is more valuable than anything we could acquire because it has the power to transform our lives from the inside out. The happiness and prosperity promised by wisdom are not just spiritual concepts, but practical realities. Those who seek and apply wisdom in their lives enjoy a life of peace and security. Wisdom guides our decisions, helps us avoid pitfalls, and enables us to make choices that lead to prosperity and well-being. This prosperity is not just financial, but encompasses all areas of life: relationships, health, purpose, and spirituality. The peace that comes from wisdom is another blessing highlighted by Solomon. He describes wisdom as a way of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. This peace is not the absence of external conflict, but an inner peace that comes from knowing we are living according to God's plans. It is the tranquility that arises when we trust in God's direction and rest in His sovereignty, regardless of external circumstances. Comparison with material wealth. Solomon makes a direct comparison between material wealth and wisdom to show us that, while gold and silver can provide temporary comfort and security, only wisdom offers an eternal and invaluable return. While wealth can be lost, stolen, or corroded, wisdom remains with those who acquire it, guiding them through life's challenges and uncertainties. Wisdom as a tree of life takes us back to the idea that wisdom is fundamental to a truly blessed life. Just as the tree of life in Eden represented the continuous connection with God and eternal life, wisdom today connects us to God's purpose and plan for our lives. It nourishes, sustains, and helps us flourish in all areas of life. Solomon challenges us to a deep reflection. Are we seeking wisdom with the same determination that we would seek material wealth? Are we valuing wisdom as our most precious possession? Or are we allowing superficial and temporary desires to distract us from what truly matters? Wisdom offers us a life of blessings, happiness, and prosperity. But to enjoy these blessings, we must be willing to seek it diligently and apply it to our daily lives. Solomon presents wisdom as the source of all true blessings, happiness, prosperity, peace, and a fruitful life. He challenges us to prioritize the pursuit of wisdom above all other goals, knowing that by doing so, we are choosing a path of life that is blessed by God and aligned with His purposes. This choice leads us to a life of blessedness that goes beyond the material and touches the eternal. As we prepare to conclude Chapter 3, we are called to consider, are we seeking wisdom with all our hearts? Are we willing to value wisdom above material wealth and temporary achievements? These are questions that will shape the course of our lives, and Solomon encourages us to make wisdom our greatest treasure. Throughout Chapter 3, Solomon has guided us through a series of practical advice that reveals the profound value of wisdom in our lives. This chapter is a rich tapestry of promises and guidance that, when applied, lead us to a blessed and prosperous life. Trust in God is the foundation of everything. When we place our full trust in the Lord and set aside our self-reliance, we create space for Him to guide our steps and straighten our paths. This trust is not an isolated act, but a way of life that leads us to acknowledge God in all our ways, ensuring that our decisions are always aligned with His will. Solomon also teaches us that the fear of the Lord is fundamental. We should not consider ourselves wise in our own eyes, but should turn away from evil, recognizing that true health and refreshment come from a life lived in reverence and obedience to God. It is this fear that protects us from the traps of pride and foolishness, keeping us firmly planted on the path of righteousness. Generosity is another key to a blessed life. By honoring the Lord with our wealth and the first fruits of our income, we demonstrate our trust in His provision and our gratitude for His blessings. In return, we experience the abundance that God promises to those who put His priorities first. This abundance goes beyond the material, touching all areas of our lives with peace, contentment, and spiritual prosperity. Divine discipline, though often difficult to accept, is an expression of God's love. He corrects us not to punish us, but to guide us back to the right path. Discipline shapes our character, strengthening us and preparing us for the blessings He wants to pour out on us. By accepting this discipline with humility, we grow in wisdom and draw closer to God. Finally, wisdom is presented as an inexhaustible source of blessings. More precious than gold or silver, wisdom brings with it a life of blessedness, peace, and prosperity. It is the tree of life that nourishes and sustains us, ensuring that we live not only with material abundance, but with a spiritual richness that transcends temporary circumstances. As we conclude this chapter, it is important to remember that wisdom is not something to be sought superficially. It requires a deep and continuous commitment to living in accordance with God's principles. By trusting in God, fearing the Lord, honoring Him with our wealth, accepting His discipline, and diligently seeking wisdom, we ensure that our lives are rooted in eternal truth and the blessings that come from walking with God. Now, I want to hear from you. How have you experienced God's wisdom in your life? Share your story in the comments. Your experience can inspire and encourage others to seek and apply wisdom in their own lives. And don't forget, our journey through the secret codes of Proverbs is just beginning. In the next video, we'll dive into Chapter 4, where we'll continue to uncover the deep and transformative truths that Solomon has left for us. There are still 31 chapters full of teachings that promise to transform your life. So, don't miss the next video, and let's continue this journey of wisdom together.